A first for our club, and we welcome you to our fine community. Sitting with us, along with the Carter family, we have the president of our College Rotary Club, Gare Heiss. If you could please stand, Gare. He has been very instrumental in the program, so we thank him very much. We also have with us the Rotary District Sunrise Club President-elect, Mrs. Dorothy Hull, and her son. Our faithful Assistant Governor is also to the right of Dorothy, and that is Jean Sloan, and she is the District Governor or the Assistant District Governor of our District 5190. I would also like to welcome the President and very passionate organizer of our local Habitat for Humanity efforts, Mr. Doug Madden. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a great and memorable program ahead of us today. But first, let us enjoy our fellowship and a great meal with the Carters.
Ignore him, he'll go away.
Like the bathtub. Wow.
It's just like a private. Rotary tradition.
Please stand for those folks that are joining us that are non-Rotarians. If you could, please stand. We welcome you and with open arms, and we wish you great prosperity. I would also like to have the Habitat for Humanity volunteers please stand up at this time to be recognized. There you go. The main one right here. We're sure your group will be successful in Rotary. Will help you, the community of Elko will help you, and everyone will do everything they can to support your efforts. We've slightly modified our meeting today, and for good reason, but next week we'll be back to normal. But I would like to also recognize another guest that sit at our table. To the right of me is our Mayor Mike Franzoya. And it's time to recognize those members with birthdays. Dr. George Manila, your birthday was on September 30th. Happy birthday. Mr. Terry Sullivan, October 4th. Happy birthday. And Mr. President, you will also have a birthday on October 1st. We usually have a tradition of not announcing Rotarians' ages, but researching you on the internet and in books, I don't believe that it is a secret that you will be celebrating your 82nd birthday. Happy birthday. now to our very special program. Mr. President, I have to be honest with you. When you became president in 1977, I was only 10 years old. And my interests were not in politics at the time. In fact, my biggest concern at the time was why the government was not doing enough to rescue Gilligan and the skipper. As I grew older, I took notice of all your humanitarian efforts and your hard work for peace. We are very fortunate today to have such a great and admired ambassador, not just in our own country, but the world as well. Jimmy Carter was the 39th President of the United States from 1977 to 1981. Ever since, President Carter has continued to be a major player on the world stage. Since 1984, President Carter and his wife Rosalind have led the Jimmy Carter Work Project for Habitat for Humanity. They continue to donate their labor. Next month, they will spend a week in India helping build quality and affordable housing. The Carters also oversee the Carter Center in Atlanta. President Carter continues to crisscross the globe, fulfilling the center's mission, waging peace, fighting disease, and building hope. For his efforts, President Carter was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 2002. It is an honor for me and our Rotary Club and our clubs to introduce to you our 39th President, Mr. Jimmy Carter.
Thank you. Well, first of all, I want to thank President Ruben for letting us be here. I want to thank the mayor for accompanying us from the earlier meeting, and thank the people of Elko for turning out in such a tremendous way as this. Rotarians and your guests and the people from the community and Habitat workers all are very close to me. One of the reasons that I'm able to be here is that I was involuntarily retired from the White House by the 1980 election. And that has given me a little more time to prepare for this meeting. As a matter of fact, there's not everything wrong with that. I remember a cartoon in the New Yorker 2 years ago. This little boy's looking up at his father, and he says, "Daddy, when I grow up, I want to be a former president." Well, former presidents have a good life, and one of those lives that makes it nice for us is that when you are out of the White House, you see much more clearly what has made this nation the strongest, most influential nation on earth with the highest basic moral ideals. And when we have differences among us, political differences or ethnic differences or differences of income or geography, they fade into relative insignificance compared to things that bind us together. My wife and I, as President Ruben pointed out, organized the Carter Center. We have traveled in more than 125 nations in the world. We now have active programs in 65 nations on earth where the needs are greatest. 35 of those countries, not surprisingly, are in Africa. And what we do is go into a nation. I use the full influence that is mine because I have been president of a great nation, and we eradicate disease, we control disease, we teach farmers, small farm families, how to grow more food grain. We build hope and self-respect among the people that lacked it. In over half the people on earth, they have less than $2 per day on which they can survive. 1.2 billion people less than $1 a day. One of the elections that we held last year was in Liberia. Half the people in Liberia live on 50 cents a day. And it's hard for Americans even to envision what it means to try to pay for home, clothing, food on 50 cents a day. You can see you don't have anything left for self-respect or for hope or dignity or education or health care, the things that we take for granted. That's what my wife and I do now at the Carter Center. While we're in those countries, dealing with health care, dealing with agriculture, if they have a serious problem, like they want to change a totalitarian government to a democracy, or if they have a ruling party that's dishonest, we volunteer to go in and help write a new constitution, pass the laws, and monitor an honest and fair election. And we're now involved in the 65th election that my wife and I and the Carter Center have helped to orchestrate in the world. My wife has become the foremost leader in the field of mental health, teaching people around the world that they should not have a stigma attached to families with someone in the family who has mental illness, and to teach people that the experiments and research on the brain have brought the wonderful opportunities for helping people that have mental illnesses live a normal and productive life. Once a year, for one solid week, and now for 24 years without missing, my wife and I have led groups of volunteers to go to different places in the world to build habitat houses. One year we go to the United States, and the next year we go overseas. And we travel all around to the most poverty-stricken communities in America. And then we have been to Europe, we've been to Canada, we've been to Mexico twice, we've been to South Korea, and also on the DMZ between North and South Korea. We have been to South Africa, and in a few weeks we'll be going to India to build homes. And as you possibly know, Habitat for Humanity is a kind of organization that gives people a chance to have a decent home that never have in the past. We require them to work 500 hours or so on their own house, and they pay full price for the house, but the Bible says you don't charge interest, so they have monthly payments over a period of 20 years or so that they can afford having a decent home that they themselves own. And I'm very grateful that the income from this particular luncheon is going to the Habitat people, and I encourage all of you to join and be volunteers when the time comes. Next year we'll be right on the outskirts of Mumbai, India, which most of you may still know as Bombay. And my mother, when she was 70 years old, was a Peace Corps volunteer in the same community. So we're going back where my mother was to build 100 homes. And we'll have several thousand volunteers who join us there, all of whom pay their expenses to India, furnish their own tools, and do it out of the kindness of their heart. I think that is a kind of commitment that exemplifies what this nation is. Rosa and I had 4 children. We had 3 boys. Then we had a 14-year argument that I won finally, and we have one other child that turned out to be Amy. A lot of people don't know that we had boys as well, but one of my sons is now running for the U.S. Senate in Nevada. We're very proud of him. I'm going to introduce him in just a second, but I might point out quickly that we also have 11 grandchildren, and we just recently had our first great-grandchild, which is Jack's grandson. So that gives you a background on our family. And now my role is to introduce my son, Jack. I think I can say without question that I know him better than anyone in this room. He grew up on a farm. I'm still growing peanuts and cotton and corn and soybeans and so forth. Jack was a hard worker then. He knows what discipline is. He knows what independence is. He's always been an independent thinker. Jack was a star student, had the highest SAT score in our whole congressional district. I went to Georgia Tech to get a degree in physics. While he was there, the Vietnam War started. Jack had a college enrollment deferment, but he didn't think it was right for the poor kids who couldn't go to college to be drafted. He quit Georgia Tech, went to Vietnam, served in the U.S. Navy, where I served for 11 years, and then came back home, finished his degree in physics from the University of Georgia, and then he went to the University of Georgia. I went to Czech, then he went to the University of Georgia, got a law degree, and since then he's been involved in agriculture, in business, finance. He's familiar with this entire nation. He's a tough, competent businessman. He knows the issues. He will always tell the truth, even when it may not be politically popular to do so. He will represent this state well, and he will never give up, and he will protect the basic moral values of our country. I don't know of a finer recommendation for a public servant in Washington, and I'm very glad and proud to present my son, Jack Carter. Thank you very much.
And that's my daddy. It's quite a lead-in act, isn't it? Elko has a particularly close place in my life in this election, because this is the first place that Elizabeth and I came to campaign. I decided I was aggravated at what was going on in the government back in October, and I said, darling, we're just going to have to go see what this is about. My assumption is that the places out here in rural Nevada are exactly like the place that I came from in rural Georgia. And so we got in the car back in October, and we drove up here 450 miles, and it gives you a different perspective on the state of Nevada than you get when you're on the west side of Las Vegas. The great thing was, I mean, Dad hasn't, this is his first time, and he flew. But Dad, let me tell you, it's 450 miles. The biggest town in between here and Las Vegas is Ely, and that ain't very big. And there's not another town through there outside of Ely that's much bigger than Plains, and Plains is 650 people. And that was, as Dad said, a big part of my background, because small town living is unique. It is, and I try to tell it to people who grew up in cities, but the closest way you can tell it is in small towns you have to be able to get along with people you don't agree with. And they seem to be everywhere when you start off. But the great thing about it is, once you decide that you're just not going to talk about those things anymore, you find out that there is an awful lot that brings us together than what separates us. And that, to me, is basically where I come from. I come from a small town where you find out that the things that make you Americans are the things you agree on instead of the things you disagree on. And that actually those people who are in the other party or whatever have these weird ideas are pretty good people once you quit talking about those things with them. So it's a real pleasure to come up here. When I first got here, as a matter of fact, Elizabeth and I went to Mr. Mike's to eat that night, and that's our first real close experience with fast food, and it was a great thing. We came up here to a Democratic Party meeting, and in fact what I found was that, yeah, the people up here are the same as the people I grew up with. So that was interesting. The next time we came up here was at the Bass Festival. We watched the running of the bulls, and I found out, again, a little bit more about Elko, although I suspected to start with. We were campaigning on the street, and I had a 30-year-old, probably 35-year-old guy start to argue with me, and I liked him because he's one of those people who was asking sort of the right questions in enough of a belligerent tone that showed he didn't particularly care whether he respected me or not, but he didn't mind if I did the same thing back to him. And after we talked a little bit, he said, well, tell me where you are on this conservative, liberal, moderate sort of road. So I said, well, in personal freedoms, I'm a libertarian. I said, in fiscal matters, I'm a conservative businessman. And he said, how can you be a Democrat? And Elizabeth again was right there, and I say, see, this is the problem. When you leave these people alone up here, they'll define you instead of letting you define them. But yeah, it's a great experience, and I love coming up here. We drove when we first drove through, through the Ruby Mountains and caught a real glimpse of this. And this state has just grasped me. Not only are the people like the people I grew up with, who I liked and who are very libertarian also in personal freedoms, but it is also such a beautiful state to drive around in and to travel in, and I've had a great time so far. I'm still working here, but let me tell you a little bit, because you are my kindred in terms of what we do for a living and how we view what's going on in the world and in our local communities. To start at the end, Elizabeth and I currently own and operate a small investment company. And when I say small, it is she and I. And we have a lot of tentacles that go out now with telephones and faxes and internet and things like that. And so that's basically how we operate. Elizabeth actually bought this condo on the internet while we were living in Bermuda because she knew we were not going to live in Bermuda long, and we've got kids scattered around that never came to see us, and they come to Vegas all the time. Our new grandbaby has not been here yet, but he's only 3 weeks old, and I'm sure by the time he's maybe 2 months, he will have come to visit us also. So it's a great place for us, and I didn't think about that when I said about maybe not moving to Elko, in the near future, because I'm not sure Elko would be as much of a draw, because these guys are just in their 20s and 30s. Later on, they'll catch up. Let me give you a sort of a history about my background. As Dad said, and I said, I grew up in a small town, agricultural town. I spent a lot of my time back when we say the peanut warehouse. I was literally back in the warehouse. We actually had an office, which I didn't see very much. And whenever my brothers and I get together on Christmas or something like that, eventually the conversation falls to how badly Dad treated us. I mean, you guys are concerned about the minimum wage up here, but trust me, you don't have to have a minimum wage if you're an agricultural employee. I know that at least goes back to the 50s. But after that, I left Plains and went to Georgia Tech in physics, and as Dad said, went into the Navy, got out of the Navy and came back and finished up in physics. But by that time, I decided that I wanted to be a lawyer, and so I went to the University of Georgia. I got out of the University of Georgia in 1975, and that was a time when the Carter campaign was getting fired up. And so I went straight into the Carter campaign and had a great time, and I'll tell you a little bit about it before I leave. But when I got out of that campaign, I decided that I didn't want to be involved in the politicking that was there. I was living in North Georgia. And so I started a grain elevator. And the grain elevator business is a fascinating one if you're somebody like me. And what it does, I dealt in, basically it was grain, but what you really deal with is prices. And imagine those of you who have retail stores, and the price in the retail store can change every 2 minutes. And not only that, it can change in 2 minutes in more of an amount than you've got as a margin. That's what you deal with when you get into grain, because you've got commodities markets and you don't have any control of them. And you got to pay a farmer some price, and so you got to figure out what to do on the other side to make sure that price doesn't go away. And it's called hedging, and once you get into the hedging side of it, then you find out the other things that you can do and the new products and everything else. Well, I really got involved in it, as you can tell, and I'm not going to tell you nearly as much as I think you ought to know. Well, then I found out in 1979, how many of you were in business back in 79, 80? What I remember from that time is that the interest rates were extremely high. And I don't blame Dad at all. But I got involved in trying to transfer the knowledge I had in the grain business over into the financial business. And I did, eventually. And when Dad got beat in 1980, involuntarily reassigned, I wound up going to Chicago Board of Trade, and got into financial futures. And this was how you control interest rates at the time. And I really got into that too. I won't go into it, but eventually left there and went to Citibank and foreign exchange. So I worked for some, speculated with some locals in the pit. I worked for Citibank. I had a grain elevator. And then I met Elizabeth in 1992, and she was in the banking business and had just moved over to the investment business. And we wound up, actually I met her on one night. I told her I liked her a lot. I wasn't going to marry her, and we got married within 3 months. And the only reason it took that long was because I had to get Mom and Dad to schedule a place, because they're very heavily scheduled. We wound up going, though, in the financial business at that point over to Bermuda. And in Bermuda, I worked for Invesco, which is a big money manager. And then later on went to work for Bank of Bermuda. And again, very much the sort of the high volume, high minimum investment strategies that we looked at. And again, that's how we got to Las Vegas ultimately. Just a couple of minutes here about why I decided to run. And the main reason is that I'm a businessman. I'm sick of fiscal irresponsibility. I was just talking to the mayor, and I know in a small town, if you're going to fix a road, you got to have it paid for. And unfortunately, we don't have to do that in Washington. We can just let China and Japan, just take over our debt, which I don't think is a wise thing to do, not least of which is because of my background. I know that if China ever did want to disrupt our society for any reason from a defensive standpoint, they could do it just by selling an awful lot of bonds that we have. And that drives the price down, sends the interest rates way up, and it can be very disruptive. And that's not just from a business standpoint of not letting your competitors be the ones that you borrow from. So that part of it really bothers me about this government here. The second thing is I am an independent person. I'm a Democrat because, as I said, I believe that Democrats are in favor of the working men and women in the country. But there are an awful lot of issues that have nothing to do with being a Democrat or a Republican, and those have to be solved just like you solve them here in Elko by getting a bunch of people who actually want to solve the problem. And that's what I want to do. I want to go up there. The third thing is, when you talk about U.S. traits, what it means to be an American, part of it is the common sense and changing according to the kind of conditions that come up to you. These are exactly the things that we do as businessmen. You don't go through life not making mistakes in business. And the only way you survive is you change them. You change the direction that you're going. And when I look at what this has been happening in our country, what I see is that we do not admit mistakes on the national level. One of the last things I'll talk about here is that I am somebody that believes that government ought to stay where it is and not come down to what I'm doing. I said I was a libertarian in personal freedoms. What I really believe is this. The federal government is not there to protect me. The Constitution is there to protect me. And when I look at what's going on in this, and I don't want to make it, too partisan here, but when I look at what this government has done, there are two areas that bother me. One is personal freedoms are what the Constitution really was designed to keep, and they listed them, and they made sure that nobody got close to those kind of things. The problem I have right now is that this government is taking over these personal freedoms. They are trying to dip down and say, no, it is the administrative branch that is going to protect you, just sort of step aside and let us do our job. I am of the opinion that there are three branches of government, and that I'm going to let all three of them work for me, instead of having one branch of government take that job on by itself. And the second thing I don't like about this is that this government is because part of the other the stuff that the Constitution does is it limits the federal government. And I'm used to old kind of Republicans that I've always, in fact, that's who my clients are. But this particular brand has said, we want to take over the control of the states and the local government. There are at least 50 petitions out there from the either 51 to 54 governors in this state, in this nation, that are writing in violation to please tell the federal government not to do one of the programs that they want to do. One of the things that has just occurred, just as an example, is that there is a move by the federal government to say that the state government cannot have very high insurance standards, that the federal government can undercut the insurance standards that the state government wants to put on. And that's something that obviously is a states' rights kind of thing. And we need to make sure that we are where we are in the Constitution of the United States, and that we very carefully look at what's going on in front of us here. So I'm a businessman. I'm just like you are. I'm from a small town. I'm aggravated at this government, I'm sure, for the same reasons that you are. And what I want to do is I want to go up there, and I want to be your senator. And before I leave, my one partisan thing is that my opponent has voted with this administration 96% of the time since he's been a senator. And somebody asked me about, being a carpetbagger. And what I said to him was, well, if I'd been born and raised here and I went up to Washington and I voted with those guys 96% of the time, I might as well be from Texas. So y'all remember that. Take a look at me coming up here. And thank you very much for coming out. It's a real pleasure.
At least your father's the same height as I am, so
podium worked out really well. In closing, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to thank Mr. President Jimmy Carter, as well as Jack and Elizabeth Carter, for such a historic program for both Rotary and our community. And in the tradition of Rotary, we usually give our guest speakers Rotary mugs or pens. I'm sure you have plenty of those. But in this case, we have a gift to you that I am sure will be much more appreciated. Because of your visit to our club, Rotary was able to raise an estimated $1,438 that will go to support our local efforts to create our own chapter of Habitat for Humanity. For those of you that are interested in participating in Habitat for Humanity, of course, our president of Habitat wants to put in a plug here for the next meeting. Next meeting is October 11th at 6 p.m. at the First Presbyterian Church. So I would urge anyone that's interested in participating in that organization to please do so. So I'd like to thank our guests for such a great program. Thank you for your time, and may God bless you and your family, Mr. Carter.
Thank you. Hope you can bring it out. All right, so I'll send you an email. And you guys are welcome to come out next year too and help us on our first bill. All right.
What'd you do?
Good, how are you?
Thank you, everybody. That was great.
I wonder what the note said that President Carter dropped off.
Fellow Rotarians, our meeting is adjourned.